and it meant some radical adaptation. Whoops. For example, Xavier had taken a vow of poverty as a Jesuit. And in Europe, visible apostolic poverty was part of the society's moral authority. But he recognized now that in Japan, the moral authority attached to being poor simply didn't obtain. And so he and his fellows instead dressed as wealthy Japanese scholars, and they presented themselves as foreign dignitaries, bearing valuable gifts. The daimyo of Yamaguchi, Uchi Yoshitaka, was one of the first to accept this. In 1551, he gave the Jesuits permission to preach in his dominions, and he gave them the use of a Buddhist temple. That last detail is not an accident. Buddhism was a substantial minority religion in contemporary Japan, and it was also a controversial one. During the era of civil war and of this era of chaos that lasts from the late 15th through the 16th century, many Buddhist monasteries had in effect become independent military powers. And for daimyo who are trying to consolidate their local control, the Buddhists were often a threat. The Jesuits offered the possibility not just of a direct link to the Portuguese and to the firearms which they sold, but also of a religious counterweight to the Buddhists. And what harm, it seemed, could come from letting this handful of eccentric foreigners preach their alternative religion? At least that's the cynical way of seeing it. But too much cynicism about this mission will not do. It's vital for this whole story to understand that Japanese Christianity was never merely a tactical political entity. Real converts of persuasion and conviction, were already being made. To take the man whom we know only by the name he chose on his conversion, Irma Lorenzo, the first Japanese actually to become a Jesuit brother himself. This man was virtually blind, was a traveling minstrel who was converted by Xavier himself, and now seamlessly added Christian evangelism to his repertoire. He's one of the first signs that Catholicism was genuinely going to put down roots in early modern Japan. Xavier left Japan in late 1551, but others stayed to continue the work. A turning point, a promising and also ominous one, came in 1562, when for the first time a daimyo, Omoru Sumitatu, actually converted and was baptized. He promptly embarked on a purge of Buddhist worship from his territories, burning temples, destroying statues, despite the Jesuits urging him not to. And this is a sign of what's to follow, thanks in part to the most extraordinary political figure in 16th century Japan, the daimyo Oda Nobunaga, from Owari province in central Honshu. In 1568, he successfully installed a new shogun following the murder of his predecessor, and he emerged as the country's most powerful military leader. He's not of high enough birth to become shogun himself. Nobunaga was no Christian, but he was ferociously anti-Buddhist, and he understood the old principle about my enemy's enemy. In the same year, 1568, he extended formal privileges to the Jesuits. During the 1570s, Nobunaga's power and Christian conversions grew almost in parallel, especially on the southern island of Kyushu, which had been the center for Christian activity from the start. By the early 1580s, there were astonishingly some 150,000 baptized Christians in Japan, the vast majority of them on Kyushu. That number was astonishing, and it was also suspicious. The numbers had far outstripped any kind of priestly provision. In 1583, there were 32 priests in Japan ministering to that enormous number of converts. All of them were European at that point. Many of these were plainly factional political conversions, taking their lead from political leaders. Whole territories were being baptized at a stroke. Of course, that was the way things worked in Europe. It was the way things had worked in Europe back in the days of initial conversion. A more cynical missionary establishment might have accepted that and worked with it. But not Alessandro Valignano, the new visitor of missions to the Indies for the Jesuits, who arrived in 1579 having been fed exciting tales of the growth of the Japanese mission and was horrified rather than excited by what he found.